Welcome to the world's stickiest learning. I am absolutely pleased that this title will be a deep dive into whole brain thinking with our psychologist Johan. Johan, how are you?
I'm very well, and thank you for the opportunity, guys.
And we're here with George as well. Hi, George. You good?
Hello. Hi. Good, and you?
All right, so we'll ask these guys to introduce themselves in a moment. What we're looking to do here for the next 30 to 40 minutes is a real deep dive into HBDI, whole brain thinking, to understand this thinking preference tool. And we've got our expert here, and George and I are going to grill Johan to within an inch of his life about HBDI because he's been using it for about 500 years.
Excellent. Looking forward to the challenge.
All right, well, let's start with George. George, would you just tell us 30 seconds about you so our listeners know who you are before we get stuck in?
Sure. So I'm actually an SEO blog writer, and I've been collaborating with Darren on HBDI, which is a fascinating assessment tool. I also have my master's in marketing, but that's the boring stuff, so I don't really like to talk much about it. I did write an international best-selling book on relationships. So yeah, that would be me in a nutshell.
Well done. Well done. Thank you, George. Very welcome. Johan, would you just give us 30 seconds about you? And also, I'm going to ask you that tough question, but in the nicest possible way. Why should we listen to you when you talk about HBDI, please?
Well, first, let me introduce myself. I'm a clinical psychologist in South Africa. I have been working in the field of leadership development since 1995. Went through a number of iterations in my career. Why should you listen to me? Passion, excitement, and impact. I really am passionate about getting people to change and working with people so that they can thrive and grow in whatever their intent in life and purpose in life.
Fabulous, fabulous. Thank you, thank you. And how many years have you been, Johan, working with HBDI, whole brain thinking?
Well, in the late 90s, we had discovered it, a colleague and myself, and we wanted to get a hold of HBDI. And it was provided to somebody else to run the business in Africa. And so I hunted this person down in 2001, met up with her. She was the CEO of Herrmann International Africa, and just said, I need to talk to you. We need to get together. We need to utilize this tool because I found absolute value in it. So since 2001, been a couple of decades now.
And I didn't know that before we started this, but I had my first profile done when I worked for Sainsbury's, the supermarket here, in 2001.
Interesting.
There we go. Fantastic.
Interesting.
So
That's
about 50 years between us of Herrmann thinking. Wow. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Brilliant. So we've got some credibility. We've been using it for a while. And in this room, I think we've got a red, a yellow, and I think we've got some blue as well. So we might be missing green, but as we said in our preparation, George wore a green shirt, so we've nailed the green. Lovely.
Yeah.
Lovely.
All right, we're going to come over to George for our first question, and then we'll take turns, I think, and we'll build on those. So, George, what's our first question for Johan, please?
So I'm going to start hard. I always like to jump deep into the subject. So I'm going to start by asking, like, today, it's very trending that companies are very much masculine-led, they tend to be very rigid in their approach, and a lot of employees prefer the freedom of choice, which they are not being given. I'm not going to go deep into it, but like this is a bit of context around the question. So my question to you, Johan, is how would you, as an employee, for example, that has a blue, a yellow, a green, or a red personality type, react to that? How would you cope with this problem?
All right. So I want to say this first up front, because you've mentioned the word personality type. I think it's definitely more thinking preferences. So for me, the starting point is always this. How you think is how you act, is who you are. because our thinking, if we look at the behavior that people display, behind that is a lot of thinking. And you're so right. I mean, we all grew up with particular thinking patterns and ways of doing things. Organizations need to understand that we're in a new world of work. It's a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And so the old ways of being and the old ways of thinking, what got you there is not going to take you here.
Yeah.
And I think that's a critical understanding, that in that changing world, we've literally got to learn to shift our thinking gears, if I can use that analogy. Because if we don't shift the thinking gears, the elements of the model that you don't apply will bite you in the end. In other words, if we really look at whole brain thinking, it really implies for me that we need to climb out of our comfort zones. We can't expect other people to change or to accommodate us. We need to do that accommodation. And so what you will find in the new world of work, especially with the new generations, very flexible, very open, very willing to discover and explore. And unless you shift that gear to also accommodate them, you're going to run into difficulties. And we see this. How do we see it? We see it in organizations that want to force people back into the workplace, that are not open to work from anywhere, and they're running into difficulties. And we can talk about what the kind of leaders are that do that. But I would say that shift your gears. It's a new world. It's a different world. And, you know, Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, said it in 2018 already. That the world has never changed as fast as it is changing now. Think about that. The world has never changed as fast as it's changing now. It will never be this slow again. So unless you accommodate that, unless we're agile, we run into difficulties. So I'm not sure if that's answered the question directly, but that's a start.
All right. Well, I've got a subsequent question off the back of that.
Yeah.
So if I'm one of those colors, I might assume that the greens might struggle with this more because they're more rigid in their thinking than the yellows. I'm happy to be wrong. I'm just sort of mulling this over. What do you think?
So let's talk about what those colors are. You know, I mean, if you think of in the whole brain model, yellow is about holism, synthesis, integration. It's about innovation, forward thinking. And I think if one can use the F word for yellow, it's about future. So how do we accommodate this future? Blue, very much about goal-directed focus is the F word there. How do we solve this problem? How do we deal with the issues? How do we cut to the chase? Whereas for green wants a format. It wants structure, it wants clarity, it wants certainty. If you think about it, green very often struggles with change. It's not that they can't change, but the change they need to be able to see how that change is going to add value and what the process is that is going to follow. So now, post-COVID, the world has changed. Suddenly people are working from different places. New demands are coming in. And blue say, excuse me, what part of did you not understand? You get back to the office. This is how we've done it. Green says, hello, this is a workplace. Can you just come in here? There's due process and policies that we need to follow. Yellow says, whatever. What policies? What are you talking about? All right. And then obviously the red quadrant, people-oriented, collaboration. It's about teamwork. Now, can you imagine they run into people who tell them, this is how it will be. Just think of it for a moment. If you bring about change, what do people want? People support what they participate in. Now, if for the blue quadrant, it makes logical sense that we work from an office space or a factory space, there's no problem. They do it immediately. But if it doesn't make sense, so what do you want? Do you want me to spend time and hours, or do you want output?
Yeah.
And does it matter where you get the output, or is it where you want me to be? The green quadrants, if for them they can see how it unfolds sequentially and how ultimately it would add value, they will buy in. But don't you come and just change things for the sake of changing. Yellows go, where do you want me to work? I'll work. I can be anywhere. But certainly I think all of those quadrants are open to change. But for yellows, can I see where this is going? How is it going to add value? For blue, does it make sense? For green, yeah, show me exactly how we're going to get there. And for reds, can we talk about this? And if leaders don't do that shift, that's when they get stuck.
Yeah.
Throughout the whole of that answer, I'm just smiling and thinking yellows. It was a case of, do you want me to work on this planet or that one? I don't mind as long as you just pick a planet, you know?
Exactly.
Sorry, I'm robbing George from an excellent answer and a great question. George, do you want to come back? Have you got a subsequent question on that? It's a great answer.
Actually, it's a great answer, and I was actually going to flip the question the other side. So if you're now we're talking more as an employee. Now, what if you are an employer? How would you deal with it from the 4 different quadrants? So we're flipping the roles.
Okay, so we're talking employer now.
Yeah.
If
I'm
I'm the owner, the founder of the business, I'm the CEO, the COO, whatever the case might be. The one thing that you need to understand if you play in those roles, create a shared desired outcome with your people. In other words, what are we saying? Let people envision what it is that we're trying to achieve here. Help people understand why the shared desired outcome, our shared purpose, is so critical for us. There was a wonderful article in the Harvard Business Review that spoke to purpose, and organizations that spell out the purpose get far better buy-in because people want to believe in something bigger than themselves. In other words, if you as a leader can tell people why we do what we do, that's a critical thing.
Simon Sinek.
And absolutely back to Simon Sinek. But Simon did a wonderful job in bringing that about. But from a whole brain perspective, we've got to bring in all 4 of those questions. So we've got the why. Do we all understand why we need to do this? This is a factory. This is what we do. We need to be responsive, etc. Hey, but it's an office job. Doesn't matter where I do it. So if we understand the shared purpose, that's critical. The second question is the what. So what is it that we want to achieve? What are our critical success factors in our workplace? If you're customer facing, that's your critical success factor. Well, then you're not going to get people to do things online of necessity. But if we're a factory, what is our critical success factor? To be hand-on to get that production line to run, and we've got to make it work. So if people understand the what, and they understand what is critical for the success of the business. Remember, people don't do things out of malice. They do things because they want to understand it. So if you bring me into the fold, you bring me into the picture, you ask me for my opinion and my input, and we have opportunity to debate that. Yes, I understand it takes longer. Yes, I understand it gets irritating, because can we just get on with it? No. Bring me in. If it makes sense to me, if I feel, and that's the F word in red, if it feels right, intuitively, I would go there. Why wouldn't I go there? Because I want to add value to the team. in the green quadrants, and this is the tricky one now, because if your green quadrant is strong, you like process, you like structure, you have 1 point. But at least if you've spelled out where we're going, what we need to do, and who's involved in this process, then we can come to the how. And then we can work a shared plan, and we can work out where it's possible, where it's not possible. And then we can start playing with flexibility. What is the right way? Are we all going to be here 5 days a week or 7 days a week? Or are there times that we can come in and go out depending on the situation? And that, I think, is important for leaders to understand. It is situation dependent. But if you tell people you'll do it because I said so, well, this is not 1847. People are not going to fall for that anymore. And if you tell people, why do we do this? Because the youngsters are going to ask why. Because this is how it's worked. Well, that model isn't going to fly either, because they're going to bring you 10 models that they'll challenge you with.
So true. So true. Johan, brilliant. George, any subsequent questions? If not, I've got another big question.
Go ahead.
Okay. So as a yellow, I'm fascinated by the bigger picture of things, and I'm a lover. I have a soft spot for HBDI. I've also been exploring Myers-Briggs or DISC or any of the other models that are around. Now, in my opinion, HBDI is the best, probably because I've grown up with it and I love it. But Johan, what do you think of whole brain thinking versus all the others? How do they compare? Why should we use this one?
Well, as a psychologist involved in leadership development, in recruiting, in coaching, and team excellence, there are many tools. And the tools that you need to use should be purpose-driven. So what's the purpose of using the tool? I'm going to answer it in this way. A fool with a tool is still a fool.
Yeah.
In other words, if you're not sure on why you're using this tool, you're using it because 15 million other people have used it and they said so. And there's a wonderful book that's coming out now by a colleague and friend of mine in the UK, where he writes about the cult of personality. That was the first book, and the second book is coming out. Because everybody's looking at personality as if that's the only answer. So I have a model that I use here in South Africa. I always tell people, draw a triangle, look at the 3 Gs. There are 5, but if you look at the 3 Gs, the first one is your ability to grasp. In other words, the tools that you would use there would be cognitive assessment or ability tests. You're not going to determine a person's cognitive capability and ability to deal with complexity by using a personality profile. Irrelevant. On the other hand, you don't want to use a cognitive or an IQ test or an ability test to say to people, oh, well, because your IQ is 131, therefore you would be good at working with people. No, you need something else for that, and that's where other tools come. But certainly emotional intelligence, which has been identified now as one of the competencies or sets of competencies that we need in the future work. Different tools there again. So let me rephrase it. A tool is still a tool in the hand of a fool. But if you're very clear on that, you understand that there's competency or set of competencies that you want to assess, but how those competencies play out behaviorally, emotionally, cognitively. That's where the HBDI can come in very, very handy, because I might have all the capabilities. So let me give you an example to illustrate it. I assess many people, and we assess them at 5 levels of complexity in the workplace, ranging from operational to tactical to strategic. What do I see? I assess them cognitively. They're exceptionally good at solving problems at a strategic level. Wonderful. We appoint the person. So why is it going wrong? Because when we do the HBDI, we see that this person is strong blue-green, and under pressure goes even more green. In other words, they become nitpicking, pedantic perfectionists.
Yeah.
They want to follow due process. So I might have the capability, but how I use the capability is using my preference. And, you know, the consciousness of any organization can only grow to the level of the consciousness of the leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And no, using Myers-Briggs, well-respected tool, using ability tests. There's so many of these, literally 100. No, people will use what they use depending on what they want to get out of the tool. And they can certainly come to the same kind of conclusion. So my approach is always use the ability tests. Understand if you've done your job profile, you want to do a person-job match, cognitively, emotionally, behaviorally, at what level and what behaviors do we require people to operate at? But I always do the HBDI as well, because here's the interesting thing, such as the Myers-Briggs and many of the other tools, you also have to find fit between the leader and the person that you've just brought in.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I told you now this person's got cognitive capability. Oh, yeah, so therefore he's going to be yellow. Nope, I just told you he's strong green. But what is it that you need? Just imagine.
Yeah.
Just imagine project management. And just imagine a project manager needs to be able to flip between those quadrants. But boy, oh boy, you can be the smartest tool in the shed. But if you don't have execution, your projects are going to be late. And what do we know? We know that 70% plus of projects are never delivered on time and on costs.
Mm-hmm.
But if you use something like the HBDI and you help people understand how to shift their gears in the different phases of the project, then you can add value to them. So capability, competence, certainly. Your career tactics are going to be other issues that are very, very important as well. But certainly your character will play a role. So use the tools, but the HBDI, I always view as a meta tool. So a tool that can accommodate the inputs from the different tools that you've been using. And you can then add value to whatever other assessments you have.
Thank you. I've got a subsequent question. I wanted to ask your opinion on using HBDI as a tool for recruitment. Now, we've got a bunch of clients who do, and our thoughts are it's a tool in the decision-making process. It's not the only tool, but I'm interested in what your thoughts are on that, HBDI for recruitment.
You know, to use that old terrible phrase, there are different ways to skin a cat. And I think what we need to be careful of is equating preference to competence.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of organizations make that mistake. In other words, what I'm saying is you can come from different areas. I'm a psychologist. Who are my favorite? And I do apologize to my clients who will be watching this podcast. Who are my favorites? Engineers and accountants. I can talk their language. In other words, I can shift out of my red-yellow thinking preference into their blue-green preference. And I can help them make sense of things. But I might be very strong blue. And if I tell you, don't tell me about your dog that has died, can you just go home and sort it out? I might not sound emotionally intelligent, but I'm actually displaying what you require. You need time out. Maybe I don't want to hear your whole story. I think that the difficulty is that different people can come from different angles from these different quadrants and get the same result. Please let us not make the mistake to think that yellow is iffy pie in the sky. please can we not make the mistake of saying, if you've got a strong red quadrant, that must imply that you feely, touchy. Well, it also implies that, but what I do is I might approach problems more intuitively, more holistically, more collaboratively. And so my short answer is, don't use it for recruitment as the only tool.
Yeah, cool. That
The
makes
long
sense.
answer is preference leads to motivation, motivation leads to investigation, investigation leads to competence. But no, don't use it as a recruiting tool in isolation.
Fabulous. That makes sense. A few moments ago, sorry, I was just checking we were still recording. We are. I thought I'd forgotten to press record again, but we are. George, I'm going to hand back to you for your next question, because I think we're grilling Johan very well, and he's standing up to the task fabulously. So what's our third big question?
Actually, I wanted to ask you if you could give us examples without naming, no names, but like the best cases you've had with a red, a blue, a yellow, and a green, whether as a psychologist or when you were doing trainings, or without no names, nothing, just like the experience of it, that you from your side and their side.
Okay, I've got to make something very clear here. You know that 5% of people, of all the people who've been analyzed, 5% of people have a single dominance, meaning that they'll be either blue or red or green or whatever the case might be. 3% have all 4 quadrants as a preference. 50-something and 30-something have a double and a triple dominance. That's very critical to understand. But let me give you an example of someone that I know very well. That red quadrant is almost off the chart if it's not off the chart. This person's ability to relate with anybody, and I mean literally anybody, and I've seen this person, I've seen her operate in so many different contexts. We climb in an aeroplane and we fly to Europe, and people are around her and want to talk to her, the bursars and the hostesses and so on. You would do some training and people would say, wow. Now, the one thing that she's got is intuition. When that gut feel kicks in, you can almost put money on that whatever she tells you, it's going to work, or it's not going to come off.
Did she win the lottery?
Well, I need to talk to her about that. But she has won the lottery in terms of where she lives on the coast in one of the most beautiful places in South Africa. Having said that, that intuition is just incredible. And that relationship ability has taken her into so many directions that people, whenever they meet her, even years later, they will remember her. They will remember the impact. You remember that little statement that says, people don't remember what you said or what you did, but they do remember how you made them feel. Maya Angelou. Well, I can tell you, this person, absolutely special. I know of so many blue quadrant preferences where their ability to cut to the chase is just phenomenal. You know, you and me, we might be talking and we're going on for hours, irritating these people, absolutely. But when those blue quadrants come in and they say to you, you know what, guys, I hear what you're saying. Just focus on the following 3. Here's an example. In a retail organization where someone has taken a company that was 70 million in the red and within 18 months changes it into a 310 million profit organization. And of course, Wellbrain played a role. I'm not taking the credit for that, but I asked him, how did you do this? I don't understand it. And he says to you, you know what? People need to focus on 3 or 4 things. Don't make it more. Don't make it too complex. You know, all these balanced scorecard areas with 325 focus areas. Nobody can focus on them. But focus on how are we going to innovate? How are we going to be productive? Focus on how we're going to execute and deliver, and focus on the customer. And those were the 4 things that he said. And there it ran. Turned it around in the 18 months. Just incredible. But you also, you've seen these green quadrants. Man, policy, process, procedure. But let me give you an example, because green quadrants are very detailed. And I'm just reminded of a financial manager that I work, where strong green, but also had that red intuition. Something is not right here. And she suspected some fraud.
Okay.
Investigates, doesn't make sense. The numbers are right. Obviously, she's got a strong blue quadrant, being an accountant, runs it past her seniors, runs it past a number of people. But that green quadrant is like a bulldog, doesn't let go. And then eventually discovers that the fraud is in fact taking place. So that meticulous, systematic revisiting of it over and over and over again, not giving up, going back, taking the steps again. Brilliant example, in the end, found and saved the company tens of millions. Yellow quadrants. Man, these are crazy people. You know, I love it. Because the yellows think so out of the box. One of my clients, we had a session where we tried to say, we used a couple of words, and we said, so what's the D word in yellow? So usually for dreamer, etc. And this guy came up, he said, they're just delusional. And no, they are not delusional. Think of any product, any service in the world. But let's take iPhone as an example, very simple example. Boy, oh boy, who thought that stuff up? You had to have a bit of a yellow quadrant. Because remember what even some of their compatriots said to Steve Jobs at the time. Said, please, who's got a need for this kind of thing? And it was Steve Ballmer who said that. And we know where we are today. If we think of Google, can you guess who said that these guys just want to attend conferences and have fun? A very famous person in that industry, and we look at where they are. The value, I think, of what I see is that those yellow quadrants can anticipate. They can see things before it might happen. And they have that uncanny ability to say, you know, what about, don't you think we should? The problem is, and let me use an example in a production environment where the CEO is off the chart yellow, and he's just generating ideas. And of course, then the blue-green quadrants, you want to take the ball, run with it, pump it, and go to the people and say, he wants us to do this. But remember, he's still conceptualizing. He's still thinking it through. Next week, they come back and he says, guys, I've thought about something else. And they say, what, do you want us to change it now again? But in that forward-looking, in that integrative thinking, in that creative thinking, their ability to come up with ideas in all industries have been shown that they were actually often 6 months, a year, even 3 years ahead of everybody else. And had people just listened to them, yeah, sounds fluffy, but let's unpack that and let's utilize that. So I think those are a couple of the examples that I can think of. I see leaders who are strong blue, leaders who are strong green, or red, or yellow, or combination of those. But they each bring value given what they truly feel passionate about, and they add value.
Beautiful.
It's good that you mentioned Steve Jobs, because I was thinking about his story when he went back to Apple after being kicked out of Apple.
Yeah.
And they had a million ideas and projects going on. And Steve said, we need to just do a few. And I think he said the iPad, the Mac, and the blah.
Yeah.
And they just went,
Yeah.
and they went through the roof. And that's a lovely
Exactly.
example of Steve Jobs doing what he did best.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think we see it with the CEO of Microsoft now. Yeah. I mean, you remember Microsoft was in trouble at some point, and he's really just brought it back.
Mm-hmm.
We see it in the pharmaceutical industry. We see it in the healthcare industry. We see it in education. You know, I mean, I just remember my children had a maths teacher. She was completely yellow-blue, out of the natural fold. And one of my colleagues did studies on this. But she was not the typical maths teacher. But the children loved her because she created pictures for them.
Yeah.
She created stories for them. They made sense of that. You know, as opposed to my maths teacher who just beat the living daylights out of me because I didn't know why X plus Y would make Z. And when I looked out the window to try and form a picture, I got lambasted. I think what we need to do is, as I said earlier, even teachers, shift your gears.
Especially
Leaders,
teachers.
shift your gears, and especially teachers, because you're sitting with a diverse group of cognitive preferences there. Shift your gears, make it work for everybody, and we'll get so much more out of it.
Lovely. George, did you have a subsequent follow-up question from that?
Not really, but I did have like something I wanted to add based on what Johan was saying. It reminded me of a story that one of my mentors, the late Bob Proctor, used to say. He was telling the story of a business owner who actually passed away, and his wife was about to inherit the company. And so basically the whole board of directors and stuff were expecting her to actually sell the company because the company wasn't making so much money at the time. But she said, actually, no, I'm not going to do that. And every now and then what she did, she asked 3 questions. Now, I don't remember the third question, but I remember 2 of them. She was like, what works, what doesn't? And focus on that. So she used to say to the whole CEOs and stuff, focus on what's working, drop what's not working, and that's it. And after a couple of months or so, she was able to raise the capital of the company to I think from around 0 or something to $10 million. It was a record thing, and then they went much more and 70 million and stuff like this.
Yeah.
So
George,
the power of the group.
It goes to show we have different strengths.
Yeah.
And we have different angles that we come from, and we can add value. But we should also know that we have blind spots.
Yeah.
And often, exactly relating to your story, the board might have had a blind spot. And this lady just opened that blind spot for them and asked those questions. But we all have those blind spots. I don't care how smart you are, how experienced you are. We all have them. But should we focus just on strengths or just on the negative? And I think, Darren, you'll understand if you want to get stickiness in learning, you can't just focus on the negative, for goodness sake. But you're also going to run into difficulties because if we think that we can only focus on our strengths, because the workplace requires us to make shifts into those different quadrants. And I can't just wait. I don't do green, and therefore I'm going to wait for somebody to do that green on my behalf. Yes, certainly surround yourself with a whole brain team. Here's the interesting thing. The research that Herrmann did showed that diverse teams are 66% more effective than homogeneous team. Why?
Yeah.
Very simple. Because we're bringing all kinds of angles, all kinds of thinking. And if we can meld that together. So for me, it's always a question of how do we leverage off the value that each person brings? Because if we can leverage off that and complement that, we're going to get far, far better results than blocking people. You know, we do a creative problem solving module in some of our leadership programs. And I do a particular technique that I utilize to show people, and guys, I'm not teasing you now. We do it fun ways, and we do it specifically business related, where we get in a group of 20 in 5 minutes. Please note, in 5 minutes, the most that we have ever got was 574 ideas, but they average around 200 plus ideas, because you're opening it up for people not to be smacked down and not to be called names. You know, we can call everybody now. Yeah, you blues are you're just cold and clinical. Greens, you just control freaks. Reds, you just people pleasers, and yellows, you're just delusional. You know, we can call everybody names. That's not what it's about. How do we leverage off all of those? And I promise you, in the cases where we do those creative problem solving exercises, people can come up with some of the most amazing ideas that they never had time to think of because they were blocked. So leverage off that, and your example of this lady focused. Here are these 3 questions. Can we answer those, please? And you can bring people back on track.
Fabulous, fabulous. I'm just conscious of time. I think we could do this for another hour. We may have to do a part 2, which would be brilliant. George, any final questions you'd like to ask Johan, so we can just squeeze his brain from the last drop of what we might want to share? Short question.
I was going to go for a story, but I'm fine for now. Maybe
sure?
For the part 2, I'll add. Yeah.
Okay, all right. We might have to go for part 2. Johan, I'm just going to ask you to finish off, if you would, in a summary of. Let's say we've got a team and they've just embraced HBDI, whole brain thinking.
Yeah.
They've got their profiles. I understand I'm in this, I'm a tri-quadrant, blah, blah, blah. I got that. How do they leverage it to be a much better team? What do they do?
They do 4 things. 4 things and 4 things only, and I've mentioned some of them. We call it the reverse Z model.
Okay.
All right. So you start with creating that shared desired outcome.
Yeah.
Let's all be clear on what it is that we're trying to achieve and why we're trying to achieve that. You help the team understand what are those critical few things that we need to leverage off that will make the difference. So you move from yellow to blue. Now that we understand what is critical, we go to red, and we engage with one another, and we support one another, we leverage off one another. And as I said previously, how do we really help one another to achieve this in our whole brain? And then lastly, let's move to green, because we still have to execute. I call it the 4 Qs. If you're interested, it's called tap into the creative or conceptual quotient of people. Tap into the knowledge quotient of the team, blue. Tap into the RQ, the relationship quotient. You better have a higher relationship quotient so that you can deal with all these diverse people that you're dealing with. But you also need to have XQ, execution quotient. Yeah. Because you leave any one of those Qs out, it will bite you at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Well, I've been working with Herrmann for 20 years, and I feel as though I knew nothing before I just heard that. So, wow. Johan, awesome. George, what are you thinking?
I'm flabbergasted.
I can see George, and he's doing what I'm doing. We didn't know any of that. We've done about 5 of these HBDI podcasts. So, wow. Johan, big thank you for sharing your thinking. You clearly understand this stuff on a level that is just phenomenal. Thank you.
Thank you for that feedback. And thanks again for the opportunity. The people out there, use your whole brain. You don't have a left brain or a right brain, use your whole brain and use it with passion and purpose, and you'll get much further. Thank you for your time, gents.
Thank you.
That's cool. I've been Darren Smith, but more importantly, George, Johan, thank you for being my guests on World's Stickiest Learning. I think we're going to do part 2. I'll catch up with you guys. We'll publish this, see what the listeners think, see what questions they've got, and come back again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Wonderful.